Hey, Future Lawyer. Welcome to the LSAT Simplified podcast presented by Hey Future Lawyer, where we talk about all things LSAT, law school admissions, and otherwise. If you want to check out our free LSAT course, go to HeyFutureLawyer.com to sign up for a free account today. Hey, folks. In today's episode of the podcast, we're going to talk about a few things, including how you should learn, specifically in regards to learning science, and then we're going to apply that to the LSAT. It's funny how poorly a lot of people prep for the LSAT. The science of learning is well studied. Over the past many years, people have been doing, controlled scientific studies where they actually test different ways of learning material or skills and then see what the scientific results are. Just like you would test if a cancer treatment works versus does not work. They've done this with learning, and there are results that are very well covered. So it's crazy how poorly people quote unquote study or learn things, because we know how humans learn better and how they learn worse. Yet people do not implement these things. We're also going to be talking about why we study timed, which somewhat relates to this first one. But without further ado, let's get into it. We also may do a personal statement. Actually, we're going to do an update from last week. A person had sent in their resume. So let's actually start there. So real quick, throw back to last week. If you listened, we had our friend who was in Model UN and basically was a 14-year-old applying to law school. They're not a 14-year-old, but they portray themselves as a 14-year-old, and they didn't really give many reasons to admit them. Now, they responded to me with more about what they're up to, and they say, hey, Ben, sorry, I'm just getting back into this. It fell into the deep pits of my inbox. I've attached a PDF of my resume that I used when I applied to law school back in November of 2023. They continue. On another note, I've been scoring better with the first 13 questions for the LR sections and with reading. I took some time off because I honestly felt done with my scores and needed a breather before I just gave up. But now I'm back and better than ever. Gonna go kick some LSAT ass, comma, and then their name. All right, so yeah, good thing. As a general rule, you can always take time to pause on the LSAT. There's nothing wrong with taking a reset and giving yourself a few days or a week to get back into a better headspace. The caveat to this is if you have finite time and the LSAT is coming up, the time you're taking off does set you back. Well, it doesn't set you back. It just does not move you forward. And as such, it's time that you've burned. However, if you're studying properly and doing it in the order where you study and get your scores to where you want them to be before you take the test, that's not a problem. Because if you're already ready to go, who cares if you're taking a week off? Like this person presumably is taking the test some point this summer. For those of you listening in the future, this is March. So if you take June, you're good to go. If you take August, you're good to go. And so taking a week off in, that would have been late February. Not a big deal. And honestly, for the mental health, probably a good thing. Although if you are listening and it's like the LSAT is bearing down on you and you have to take this LSAT, it's less of an option. But assuming you're studying properly, yeah, you should take time off because it does bring you back better than ever, hopefully. So anyways, let's read through their resume. They lead with their education, which they graduated in 2024, studying psychology, and they minored in sociology and chemistry. That's cool. Then they have relevant coursework. Generally, I would not have that on a law school application. Further, this is not relevant coursework. Like you list chemistry and organic chemistry, that's not relevant to law school. So I'd be very careful with having that. Further, it's pretty unconventional to have relevant coursework. They do continue that under professional experience. They were an SAT tutor, and they met with roughly 15 students, motivating them to do exceedingly well on the SAT. Well, I wouldn't say exceedingly well. I would just say you tutored them. Like often when you use these adverbs of exceedingly, it kind of undercuts your meaning because it's like, was it exceedingly well? Like you were an SAT tutor and there's nothing wrong with that, but you don't have to oversell it. You can just say, I tutored SAT. But they said, hold 1 hour and 30-minute sessions to thoroughly comprehend the most difficult topics tested on the SAT twice a week. Yeah, you met with kids and tutored, that's fine. And then you said increase each pupil's, well, I would just say student, but pupil. I would keep it consistent. You say student in your first bullet point, you then say pupil. Not that either are wrong. Pupil is a little pretentious, I would say, but it doesn't really matter. I would just say whatever you're going to say, keep it consistent. And I'd go with the more simpler one, which is student. But you said you increased them by about 100 points out of 1,600. That's cool. I don't know if that's good. It's like I'm not an SAT dork. I'm an LSAT dork. But good. Like there's nothing wrong there. Would I write about SAT tutoring for your law school apps? I don't know. Maybe. I think if it's something you've done a lot of and you have had success with people, that can be an interesting story. It's definitely better than your mock trial that you were talking about. Well, not mock trial, Model UN in high school. You're also a private chef. That sounds really cool. You say you were self-employed and you did it for roughly 2 years. So you say you traveled to the Middle East, Asia, and Europe to experience 8 types of cuisine, which led to a greater cooking interest. Well, that's not what you did, though. That's where this interest came from. I would cut that. Talk about what you did. Don't talk about how you got your love for food. Then you said prepared 21 dishes within 1 hour and 15 minutes for a weeknight dinner to serve a family. Ooh, I would talk more about how much you did. When you say like this one dinner was a big deal, it kind of undervalues being a private chef because it's like, did you cater once or twice? So I would just talk more big picture stuff, but that could be really interesting. Like you do say served 80 people over 10 different appetizers. That's pretty interesting. Like, how did that go? That sounds hectic. And did you do that by yourself or did you oversee other cooks? If so, talk about that. There's definitely some really interesting stuff there. You also crafted a 4-course meal. Like, yeah, it's like this isn't crazy shit, but also you're relatively young. And it is cool. Like you're doing some chef work, whether it's catering or whatnot. And there are stories there. The rest, you have a decent amount of like undergrad clubs, like you have the Health Occupational Students of America and Future Health Professionals. Sounds more like doctor stuff, which does kind of go back to your personal statement where you were talking about your tension with your father and he wanted you to be a doctor and you wanted to be a lawyer. It's not bad, but I would probably lean into one of the more passionate things. Like I talked about the SAT tutoring or the chef work that you've done. You also have like EMT stuff and another like diplomatic envoy. What's that? So it says you authored a nuanced understanding of India's neutral foreign policy being thwarted by the Ukrainian war. Is this like some project for like a poli-sci course, or is this like you actually did something? You then say painstakingly researched the issue of voter fraud during one of the most polarizing elections in recent U.S. history. So I imagine that's the idea of the 2020 election. Obviously, there were the claims of voter fraud. That feels very off from the Ukrainian war and India foreign policy. So it feels like these are like essays for some college like club. So I would probably cut that. And then you have certifications, like you can use Microsoft PowerPoint. Fucking everyone can do that. So cut that. Excel, also everyone, like these are basic barriers of entry. If you can't use Excel, that's a problem. So don't put it on your stuff because you also have some interesting stuff. Like you are CPR for CPR, like, you know, if someone's drowning and you're like trying to get their heart going, you're certified. So like talk about that. Or I mean, don't talk about it, but like leave that as a bullet point. Do not have the idea that you can like use Excel or you put Outlook, which is literally email. Do not put that you can do email. That like no one cares. Not trying to be rude, but no one cares. Then you have languages, which you speak Bengali fluent, Spanish intermediate, Arabic beginner. Where this comes down to is if the admissions officer called you in that language, would you be able to hold on the phone with them? Would you be able to have a conversation in Arabic? If you couldn't, do not put it on your resume because they can ambush you and it is a bad situation if you can't speak it. So don't put that. Then you have interests, which are like tennis, platform tennis, which I don't know what that is, pickleball, cooking, traveling. I cut traveling, that's boring. And then music production. Okay, sure. And then you have high school, cut high school. You have like what clubs you were in. So anyways, like what I would write about here, probably the SAT tutoring or the chef stuff. I think the chef thing could be a really interesting personal statement if you write about how you are tackling these challenges. Like here's this dinner I have to serve. There's 80 people. We have 10 different appetizers. Here's how I handled it. And further, how did I make sure that there was like different cuisines that everyone would like, from vegetarians to gluten-free to like carnivore. I don't know. Basically, the idea is just show yourself crushing things. And then the reader will infer, oh, this person kicked ass as a private chef. Therefore, when they have clients making really crazy demands as a lawyer, just like they had their chef clients making crazy demands, this person's going to be able to take their skills, transfer them, and crush it in this new area. So I wrote about those. Otherwise, yeah, that's kind of the update on our friend. Maybe they will send in a further essay that we can then shred apart with all the love that we have. Okay, anyways, so now let's talk about why we study time on the LSAT. So I always advocate that people actually do timed prep on the LSAT. And the reason for this is because you have to do it eventually. So you may as well just start with it. The LSAT is a time test, period. End of story. On test day, there is going to be a timer in the corner and it is going to be ticking down. And there is no way of avoiding that. So that's scary. It sucks. People don't like doing time prep because it's difficult and it's like genuinely hard and like it adds pressure. But that pressure is coming no matter what. On test day, you are going to have that clock ticking down. So you may as well get used to it in your prep so that you kind of get through that panic and that freak out in prep moments when there are no stakes. If you fail, it's fine. This doesn't go on your record. No one cares. On test day, it counts. So would you rather have those freakouts now when you're studying where there's no consequences, or on test day where there's all the consequences and now, you know, the world comes crashing down? Because this is often what happens when people only do untimed prep is they get to test day and now there's no option. You don't get to turn the clock off. It is fundamentally coming at you. And the other thing is that changes the game. Now you're not practicing how you played. And this is where there's a real issue because now not only you're panicking, but people stop being able to solve questions. Because while I am a huge advocate of having the timer on, I'm not a huge advocate of rushing. I really think that you should take your time on the LSAT, solve every question, and then move on to the next one. For most people, that means you should not finish LSAT sections. The LSAT is a very difficult test, and most of you are not good enough to finish it, just very bluntly. Like, you're just not good enough. If you're not scoring above 165, you should literally never finish an LSAT section. You are dropping too many questions that you could solve, but you're moving too quick. And often you talk to someone who's scoring like 145 and getting every question done, like, bingo, there's your problem. You're going way too fast. So please slow down if you're missing questions, because that's your issue. And that is kind of the one downside to having the timer on, is people can start to rush, but you have to just learn to like be zen with yourself and slow down and just be like, it's okay that I'm not going to finish. I'm still going to take my time and do how I need to. And if that means that I'm taking, I don't know, like all the time to finish the first 15 questions, that's fine. Like, that's where you're at. But you can only get to that acceptance and that peace of where you're at in terms of speed if you allow yourself to practice timed. Because they think situations, if you don't practice time, you just do it untimed, then yeah, you'll get all 25 done, but you'll never learn to like force yourself to slow down when you have to, because you can just always finish. And so it does really become an issue. Further, test day, like, it really comes back to test day is going to be timed. So you have to do time practice at some point. And this is the real issue. Like, is untimed prep going to hold you back? Like, not necessarily, but what it does do is it is different from how you're doing it on test day. And as such, you're changing the variables. And for the most part, you don't want to be changing the variables. You want to be doing test day the same way that you're practicing. So make it easy on yourself. You're going to have to do time practice anyways. Maybe we'll just make it all your practice. And further, it's like, what's the advantage of doing untimed prep? I guess maybe you could argue that you can really focus on accuracy. But to me, that's a like necessary sufficient flaw. Whereas, like, sure, not having the clock on is a sufficient way to focus on accuracy, but is it necessary? Couldn't you just like grow up and start to get questions right without turning the timer off? If you can't, I question how serious of a person you are. Like, be an adult, solve these questions. I don't care that the timer's on. Your job is still to get the questions right. So yeah, I mean, I guess you'd be like, oh, Ben, like, I just need to solve the questions. I'm like, right. Having the timer on is not separate from solving the questions. Like, I'm saying both things. Have the timer on and solve them. But then the way you do that is by allowing yourself to go a little bit slower and actually take the time you need. So what I'm not going to say is you have to slow down, have the timer on, get them all right, and finish. What I'm saying is have the timer on, get them all right. But by get them all right, I mean get as many as you get to right. Whether that's 7 questions or 25 questions, I don't care. What I need to know is that when you're doing a question, the odds of you getting it right are incredibly high. If they're not, it means you're screwing up and you need to go slower. Because basically all of you, when these questions are explained to you, are like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I get it, with very few exceptions. And so there's nothing there that you can't figure out. You're all capable like readers. You understand the English language. So what it usually means is that you're going too fast. You're allowing yourself to be lazy. And that's your problem with the LSAT. And yeah, are there a few really hard questions? Like, sure. I'm not going to say there aren't. Most of them, no. Most LSAT questions are easy and they make perfect sense. You guys just miss them because you go way too fast. If you are a careful reader, you will score a high LSAT score. That is a guarantee. The issue is that Americans just are not careful readers. And I say Americans broadly, us Canadian, like you Canadians are not an exception. I've had some real goofball Canadians. So you guys are not better readers. You're not getting on your high horses. Anyways, so yeah, that's why we study timed, because you're going to have to do it anyways. So you may as well just do it. Like, eat the frog, get it over with. It's not going away. So you're just procrastinating by doing untimed prep. As far as like, because the rebuttal to this really is always like, oh, untimed prep allows me to get questions right. It's like, well, fucking do that time prep too. Like, no one's telling you that you have to get questions wrong when you time them. It just means that eventually the time runs out. That doesn't mean that you have to get that you just have to like start picking answers willy-nilly because the timer's on. But like, still do it the same way. Make sure you solve a question, but just don't worry about how much time it takes you. If question 1 takes you 30 seconds, awesome. If it takes you 5 minutes, awesome. I don't care. Like, I want it to get faster, but I want it to get faster as a byproduct of it's easy. Like, if I gave you a worksheet of elementary like math and it was like 2 + 2, you'd be like, Ben, that's 4. And I'd be like, right. But did you rush to get to that answer 4? Or did you do that subconsciously? Because it makes so much sense and it's so ingrained into your head that that answer just spit out of your brain. You're like 5 + 2. Do you know what the number is? Is it in your head? Is that because you're rushing to get to that number? Or is it because it's easy and you just know it's 7 intuitively because you've done this a million times and it's easy and makes sense? It's because it makes sense. Like, you're not rushing like 5 + 2. Like, holy shit, how do I get this answer? You're just like, no, it's 7. Like, I know that. It's simple. So that's where you're trying to get to on the LSAT too, is not active speed, but that very passive speed of I am so good at this that it's easy. And the only way you get there is by putting the pressure on so that it's not, well, that's strong language. That was a logical reasoning argument you could attack and be like, Ben, that's not the only way. It's the best way to get there, is to have the timer on, but then just solely focus on I'm crushing answers, and that's all I'm doing. I'm solving the one in front of me. And when I solve that question to the best of my ability, then I do the next question. And you just do that over and over until you're done. And by done, I don't mean finishing the section. I mean until the timer goes off. And for most of you, like, I really can't beat this point to death enough. You should not finish. Most of you should not ever get to the end of the section. And you all do. Like, I know that I'm talking to you, you're like, I finished though, and I'm scoring 150. Like, fucking, like, I know. That's why I'm yelling about this. Like, stop. You're holding yourself back. Because it is uncomfortable to not finish, but it is how you actually will get better at solving these questions and getting a higher score, which fundamentally is what you all want. I understand that it feels like a step backwards, which is probably why people are averse to doing it. But I promise you, it is one of the best things you can do for your score. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you. If I haven't, send me an email. We can talk about time versus on time more. But next, we're going to be talking about the science of learning. So there's a book on this called Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning. It is by Peter C. Brown, Henry L. Roediger III, and Mark A. McDaniel. In this book, these three education dorks read through a bunch of education studies that have been performed by people at universities using science and money, and they present evidence-based strategies for effective learning. Basically, what they find is that a lot of the ways we learn are suboptimal. They're not good. And even things that feel good, like the one they really come down on is rereading notes for like college. Like the best way, like if you're rereading a textbook to study for college, they're like, that's one of the most useless things that you can do. It is not a good use of your time. And so it's about learning broadly. Learning is obviously, I'd say, the acquisition of new skills or information. This can be applied to anything from like shooting a basketball to learning a language to learning how to do the LSAT. Like it's really just learning. I mean, it could be cooking. It's just about, do you understand the world around you better? And can you then apply the things you've learned to new situations, which is what we're doing on the LSAT. And what you'll find is that a lot of the things they recommend or that they discover are applicable to the LSAT. So you can make your LSAT study a lot more efficient and a lot quicker by using these things. I've always been very evidence-based, so I've always tried to work off what works and abandon what doesn't. I have changed how I advise people to study for the LSAT, and I am very happy to see that a lot of my stuff is affirmed by the science, because without further ado, let's get into their takeaways. So I have a list of takeaways. Obviously, it's a book, so like their bullet points are not perfect here. I had ChatGPT give me the bullet points if you're curious where I'm sourcing them from. But we'll just read through them one by one and ask how that applies to the LSAT. So their first point is that retrieval practice is crucial. And this means that actively recalling information or quizzing yourself strengthens memory. So what does this mean? The way I interpret this is instead of just learning these rules, it's about application. Like, are you learning how to do a weekend question, or are you actually doing a weekend question? Because when you actually do a question, you are exercising what you've learned about this question and using it on the one in front of you. So, okay, sure. Basically, it's like doing reps, like actually doing practice. Then they continue, space retrieval, which is waiting some time before recalling, enhances long-term retention. So they're saying you're not doing it right away. You're not getting the feedback on this like LSAT and then doing it. You're maybe learning and then a week later you're studying, or a day later. I'm like, okay, so basically you're using your skills. You're making sure it's like a muscle that doesn't atrophy. To attack an LSAT question, you have to do it. And you also want to space out when you're doing it. You can't just do it back to back and be like, I crushed the LSAT now, I'm good. You got to space it out if you want to learn effectively. They continue into point 2. Spaced repetition over mass practice. So this is a really good one. Here they say cramming gives the illusion of mastery but doesn't lead to durable learning. Spacing out study sessions allows for better retention and understanding. And this is a huge thing that I come back to. I always tell people plan on studying for the LSAT for a few months and plan on doing it for like an hour or two a day, which I think some people view as potentially like, oh, Ben's selling shortcuts. He's saying you don't even have to study that much, which I kind of am. I mean, 1 to 2 hours is not an insignificant chunk of your day, but it is less than other people recommend. But part of that is because it does work better. When you give it a little bit of time day after day, you make such bigger gains than if you try to do like 8 hours on the weekend. Or if you try to be like, I'm taking the LSAT in 3 weeks, I'm going to grind. It doesn't really work. You have to give it time. And they find that this is true. Chipping away a little bit each day leads to much bigger gains over the long term than does these short marathon, or not short, these long marathon study sessions, but in short periods of time. So basically, the takeaway here is study for a good amount of time in terms of months, but then per day, you don't have to do nearly as much. You don't have to cram. Cool. Next one, interleaving different topics and skills. So here they say mixing up different types of problems and concepts instead of blocking improves adaptability and problem-solving skills. By blocking here, they mean doing the same skill over and over. So say you're going to sit down and do 20 fall questions or 20 weekend questions. They're saying that's bad. And the science shows that bad. Here's the tricky thing though. The science also shows that when people do that, they perceive that they're getting better. It leads to false confidence. And people actually think that they're understanding better because when you do it back to back, it feels like you are getting better because you do start to pick up on the patterns. But what you're not building is the recognition skill of like, what am I doing in front of me? How do I apply my skills to the situation? So you're skipping one of the key steps, which is how do you apply? And you're just going straight to application. So where this applies to the LSAT is you should not do question types back to back to back. You should really just focus on doing questions. And in that, you're going to hit on all these question types, but it's going to work on one, the skill of understanding it, and then also the skill of recognition. What are they asking you? Because when you do these questions back to back, you're completely skipping the whole what are they asking you, because you already know, because it's like just a default of if I'm on a weekend worksheet, they're all weekenders. So anyways, the science is not out. This is very common. LSAT prep loves to focus on little minute things like, oh, we're going to do 10 weekend questions or 20 necessary assumption questions. And it is bad for learning. Don't do that. I know a lot of you like doing it, but I mean, I'm telling you, if you don't like your LSAT score, which is presumably why you're listening to this, and you've been doing that, that's fucking why. It's not good science. It's bad for learning. Like, will it make you better? Sure. Will it make you as good as just doing a section and reviewing those questions? Like, no, it won't. So do that. Don't focus on these like question type drills. Another note on this is occasionally people are like, oh, Ben, like, do you just not have them? Like, do you know how fucking easy it would be to throw together 20 weekend questions? I have the spreadsheet, or not spreadsheets, the worksheets in my Google Drive. I don't give them to people because they're bad for learning. I used to make them. I no longer share them. So I'm like, that's a bad way for you to get better at this test. Anyways, the basic takeaway is don't focus on individual skills, focus on the overall skill, which is the LSAT, and you will get better. So when you do these problems or concepts in isolation, you don't get as good at them. All right, cool. Next, desirable difficulties improve learning. What they mean by this is you have to fail. They say that struggling to retrieve information and applying effort leads to deeper learning. So when you're doing questions that are hard, like sitting down, struggling, and failing on the LSAT, that makes you better. When you have these issues like, oh, I didn't figure this question out, I actually failed, that allows you to actually take something from it and get better. If you only do things that you're good at, like easy questions, or watching videos, you don't actually ever get challenged and you're not going to get better. This honestly feels pretty obvious. Well, I didn't need a book or like studies to tell me this to kind of know that this was true. But of course, failure is part of the process. If you want to do well at the LSAT, you are going to have to stub your toes, metaphorically, and fall on your face and fuck up on questions. But if you don't do that, you're not going to get better. So make sure you're actually doing questions and make sure you're failing. If you aren't missing LSAT questions every day, I don't think you're studying LSAT. Like, that's just not studying. You have to be failing. And if you're not really even doing it. Although, for what it's worth, like, the reason I say these things, I know a lot of you are probably like, Ben, I've learned how to study from you. Like, obviously, you do questions. You'd be surprised. There are a lot of people that do not focus on actually doing LSAT questions, which is kind of wild in hindsight. I mean, not even well, is it wild? I mean, the more I do this, the more I wonder, like, do these companies just not care about getting people better LSAT scores? Like, it really feels like it. Or maybe they're just so in love and like high on their own supply of like all their bullshit they've invented that they just like fail to recognize that all the LSAT takes is do questions, fuck up a little bit, and then clean up those mess ups. Like, figure out what you didn't understand. If you do that, you're going to continue to get better. They continue. Reflection and metacognition matter. So I'll elaborate on that. They say, thinking about what you've learned, what worked, and what didn't enhances mastery. So yeah, kind of like hindsight, basically reviewing and so like, how did things go? What did I understand? What did I not understand? Then they also say self-testing helps accurately gauge knowledge instead of relying on intuition. So you're not looking at what felt good. You're looking at what is the ball, like ball don't lie. Did you get these questions right? Because if you did, that means that you at least had a chance of understanding it. And if you didn't get it right, then you got a problem. Because often people can trick themselves into understanding when they really don't. I mean, the amount of people that come to me and tell me, Ben, I understand the LSAT. I am scoring 140. I'm like, you do not fucking understand the LSAT. Like, I don't know who told you understand the LSAT, but you don't. Learning what the different question types are so that you can like put them on a spreadsheet does not help you answer questions correctly. Further, this is the other reason why I really hate question types is it puts the emphasis on the wrong part of the test. It puts the emphasis on the question and what it's asking you, as opposed to just what did they say and what does it mean? If you understand what did they say and what does it mean, that is the whole point of the LSAT. So anyways, that's like my whole like real rant on question types beyond the whole learning science. This is more so me just like tweaking out and doing my things. But basically the emphasis should be on did you understand? And the honest answer for most of you is just no, you didn't. And you need to understand better. And that's your problem, is that you need to actually get what they're saying into simple language. They continue. Generation effect, creating boosts memory. And they say writing down answers before checking solutions reinforces learning. Yeah, so don't just look at the answers. Do it yourself. This also gets into predicting the answer on the LSAT. I often tell you guys too, if you can spot the gap in the argument before you go to the answers, that is often your answer. And I think people occasionally think I'm like cheating in class. They're like, Ben just literally says the answer before even looking. I'm like, right, because I'm identifying what the argument says and I know what they're going to ask me. And I'm just so ahead of things that you don't have to. Like, predicting the answer is huge on the LSAT. If you can't put the answer in your own words after reading the question, it means you don't understand what's going on. If you're like, I have to look at the answers to get any clue of what they're asking me, save a few reading comp questions where there's just nothing to operate off of. you're not doing well. Like on LR, you should always have at least an idea of what direction they can go in. So predict answers. Put it in your own words in your head. You don't have to write it down, but basically saying, oh, this is an argument. They're asking me to weaken it. What are potential objections? Like if I told you it's a sunny day, therefore Ben will go to the pool, one of your objections could be, what if it's a sunny day in the winter? And if it's a weekend question, you might be like, it's 10 degrees outside. Ben's not going to the pool because it's fucking cold. So anyways, this active, like actually thinking, putting words in your, not in your head, I guess in your head, but either like just basically saying what the answer is. Like do not treat the LSAT like a multiple choice test. Treat it as if it is short answer and that you have to actively think and put the words out there. Like the amount of you should all be able to get the questions right or right answers without actually being in, without looking to the answers. Like you shouldn't need the answers to write answers, but so many of you are reliant upon the answers and it really holds you back. Because if you could just say what the answer was, you're good to go. Like if they ask you how to strengthen the argument and you couldn't strengthen it in your own words, how are you going to pick an answer that strengthens it? You don't even understand what they're asking you. So you need to be able to write down your own answers. I mean, maybe this is an exercise. I won't make people do this because it's a waste of time. But like you should be able to take an LSAT and write an answer for every single one without even looking at the answer. It's just like in your own words, what is the answer? They continue. Concrete examples aid abstract learning. Yeah, I mean, this is a huge one. I teach from the LSAT almost entirely. We do new questions every day in LSAT class. If you sign up for LSAT class, that's a guarantee. We're just talking through questions. I am not going to teach you abstract LSAT theory because it doesn't matter. You need to actually do the questions, and then through that, you get into all the theory. The other thing is there just isn't that much theory. It's mostly like, do you know how to read? And almost always people's issues are like they just don't read well. And so you're fixing those things. And they continue. Growth mindset supports learning. Believing intelligence is malleable encourages persistence, effort, and strategy, not just innate ability to lead to mastery. Yeah, this is the other idea. Do you think you're ever capable? Because occasionally you meet someone and they're like, oh, I'm never going to score well on the LSAT. And it's like, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you are correct. Like if you truly are like, I'm going to be a 140 forever, I'm like, with that mindset, you absolutely are. Like you are correct. However, if you just change your mindset, you're like, I'm going to improve. That's also a guarantee. It really comes down to you. That does require effort. I mean, some of you want elite outcomes without putting, this is more of an Instagram problem, but a lot of you want elite outcomes without putting in elite effort. Like pretty recently, I posted on Instagram about, I made an Instagram post saying like, oh, occasionally people with a 150 get in Columbia, which is true. Every year, I'm sure Columbia takes a handful of 150s. Then the next slide, and people love this. So many people DM me and they're like, this is so encouraging. I was like, guys, the point of this was this is actually delusional. If you think you're getting into Columbia with a 150, you are fucking out of it. Like it is possible. There are a few of those people. Also, the whole point of this was that it's very uncommon. The next slide said, planning on being that one person is delusional. Very few people get in with those numbers. Like if you want a good shot, you need a high LSAT and good application materials, which is always true. Like, duh. Anyways, so one person said it's contradictory. I'm like, it's not contradictory. It's just more info. But the issue is a lot of people want to go to these schools because they're like, oh, I want to go to Columbia and tell people I go to Columbia. But like they're not willing to actually study and get the LSAT score requisite for someone to go to Columbia. The reason Columbia is held in high, and I'm just taking Columbia as like a prestigious school here. There's nothing specific there. But the reason people think it's impressive is because it is impressive. And it's impressive because you have to do work to get there. You don't just get there by being anybody. But too many of you are just like putting in the effort of any random kid and expecting to get extraordinary results. If you want extraordinary results, you need extraordinary effort. And like, sorry, not sorry. If you don't want to put in the effort, that's fine. You choose what you want out of life. If you would rather go out on the weekends, and for what's worth, you can have many things. You know, it's not like either or. But if you're like, oh, I want to like party with my friends and I don't want to study for the LSAT, that's fine. You don't get to go to Columbia. You don't get to tell people you're going to Columbia because too many of you are also going because you just want to like post it on social media. And it's just, anyways, I mean, the whole point here is that if you want good outcomes in life, you have to work for them. And I'm not here to say whether or not you should want those outcomes. Well, when someone's like, how do I get into like Harvard with a 150? I'm like, stop being lazy. So you don't have to end with a one. None of you need to end with a 150. And if for what's worth, if you want to end with a 150, that's fine. I'm not here to judge you. I don't care if that's what you want out of life, like knock yourself out. But you don't get to have your cake and eat it too. You don't get to not put in the work and then also want an extraordinary outcome. That's not how this works. And anyways, so that's that. It also just a total side tangent. But one of the best ways I know someone's going to be a terrible student is when they reach out to me asking, how do I score a 180? I have yet to meet the person asking how to score 180 who even scores 165. These kiddos, like if someone comes to me like, I'm aiming for perfection, I'm like, you aren't going to do anything because you, and I mean, total side tangent, but it's really funny because you think you're like, oh, those people have high, like aim for the moon, maybe you'll end up among the stars. I'm like, not with 180s, aim for the 180s, you'll end up in the 150s. Because those people, I don't know. I think it's more of a personal trait. Like these people tend to be kind of goofballs and are maybe delusional about their outcomes, and as such are delusional about the amount of work required. But it's just kind of a funny tangent because you don't typically think of, well, you would think of like, oh, they're aiming for the stars, therefore they do bad. As someone who like teaches LSAT, I'll tell you, when someone reaches out like, hey, how do I score 180? I'm like, probably don't. Anyways, so yeah, what else do we have? Well, I have an addendum today, LSAT and GPA. So let's see if this is still open and we'll break it down. So this is someone who's in class, and basically I told them not to submit this. I think they're going to, but we're going to break it down nonetheless and just talk about whether or not there's anything worth salvaging here. So they wrote both an LSAT addendum and a GPA addendum. Basically, addendums for law school admissions are documents that you submit to add context. So say you really bombed your GPA your first year, but then you crushed it your last couple of years. Maybe you write about that and you can recalculate to show what your GPA would have been. On the LSAT, it's more about like if you improved a lot, let's say you went from a 150 to a 175, and they're like, hey, how'd you do that? That's a pretty extraordinary jump. You write about, oh, here's what I did, here's what happened, just because they want the context. Often people make excuses in addendums, and excuses don't work because everyone with a low GPA writes about it in their GPA addendum. And as such, as admissions officers, they get very calloused and they kind of stop listening once they've heard the same story over and over. They're like, oh, sob story, we don't care. Further, it kind of makes you look bad. It looks like you're not owning your shit when you're like blaming your GPA or LSAT on outside circumstances. Because I guarantee you, no matter who you are, there's someone who had worse circumstances than you who did better on their GPA and who did better on their LSAT. So you don't look like, it's not an excuse. You kind of just look like a loser, for lack of a better term. And I know that's like kind of harsh, but also that is how these often read. This one specifically, I did a little bit of editing on for this person, but we'll read it nonetheless. These are a lot shorter than what they initially had written. Because for what's worth, these need to be short. Like these need to be like 3 to 5 sentences tops. Often people just write on and on and on. And I promise you that the longer they are, the more harm they're doing. But let's see what they say. So starting with their LSAT addendum. They say, while studying for the LSAT, I significantly assisted my mother with the majority of her finances beginning in 2023, and it has occurred for a plethora of reasons, including lack of finances for living expenses, as well as medication costs that resulted in myself working at least 50 hours a week during this time I was studying. Okay, so this person has, for one, that was one sentence, it was 57 words. That's like an LSAT reading comp sentence. That needs to be rewritten. That's a really bad sentence. Further, was this any reasons why this person should get a low LSAT score? Are there people that have helped out their mom or dad and have still gotten a high LSAT? Or that have been going through financial trouble and have still gotten a high LSAT? Yeah, the answer is yes, they have. So you look like a loser when you tell them that I had troubles, therefore I have a low LSAT. They're like, okay, you're going to have troubles in being a lawyer. You're going to have troubles in law school. Are you going to just like stop showing up to law school class? Are you not going to get good grades because you have to help people out? Like it's sure. Like I'm not arguing with anything here. What I'm saying is that you don't look like a winner. This is not a reason to admit you. This is a reason to reject you, which is someone is going to underperform. Because I don't even know why you're writing the LSAT addendum. Presumably it's because you didn't get the LSAT score that you wanted. I know you're in LSAT class, so just keep going until you like your score. Don't write an LSAT addendum, let the LSAT speak for itself. LSAT addendums are for increases, not for a low score. If this is meant to like hopefully help you overperform a low score, I promise you it's not going to. This is going to hurt you. So I would not submit anything here. Further, let's actually parse it out and break it into clause by clause. They say, while studying for the LSAT, I significantly assisted my mother with the majority of her finances. I'm like, okay, so you're helping her out. That's nice, I guess. Also, I don't see how it's relevant to applying to law school. If anything, it's kind of a point against you because it's like if you have to pay for your mom, how are you going to pay for law school tuition? Remember, these people are not on your team. They are looking to compose a class of people that will raise their ranking and will pay them money. So you not crushing the LSAT, which I mean, I don't know your LSAT score, but just presume like, why would you write this if you had a high LSAT? If you had a high LSAT, you don't need to write this. Further, helping your mom out means that it's less money going to them, which they don't like. So not to be like super cynical, but I don't think this helps you. She says, and it has occurred. What is it there? Is it like helping your mom out? For a plethora of reasons. Don't say plethora, just say, it occurred because, including lack of finances for living expenses. Okay, so she doesn't have money, as well as medication costs. So your mom she needs medication, and that's expensive. And you say that resulted in you working 50 hours a week. So yeah, just say you worked 50 hours a week. If you're going to write this, which once again, I wouldn't, because a lot of people work very intensely and still crush the LSAT. But if you are going to write this, what you want to write is, I worked 50 hours a week while I was studying for the LSAT to help pay for family medical bills. I couldn't dedicate as much time as I wanted to. That's what you would write. You still, for what's worth, that's not going to do well either. That will also still make you look like not a winner, because it still looks like, okay, here's someone who did have to study well, who had a difficult life and was able to crush the LSAT. And you're going to lose to that person. But Anyways, I just would not submit it, but if you are going to submit it, clean it up and change how you write it to kind of that idea of I had to study 50 or not study. I was working 50 hours a week while I was studying. I was paying for family medication. That's what's up. But, even then, I would be careful. They continue under their GPA addendum. They say my overall LSAT GPA is 3.52. However, during my junior year, I was the victim of a crime. And this is good. They're not oversharing. They're just saying, like, this happened very matter-of-factly. I chose to take pass-fail courses this semester. I then said, without calculating the semester/year, my overall LSAT GPA is X.XX. So they haven't recalculated it, but I like it. They're just saying I had a bad semester. I was the victim of a crime, which is good. You're giving context, but not too much context. You're not saying what happened. You're just like, here's like very matter-of-factly, I was the victim of a crime, and it led to me taking pass-fail courses. I did note that pass-fail typically doesn't get counted, so this actually shouldn't be an issue. So I asked them like, what else is going on? But yeah, they continue. This GPA is more representative of the student I am today. And yeah, I would end it there. They do continue. I would hope that involved into my application process would take into consideration the consistency and hard work that I put forward throughout the hardships that I've learned from and remain positive about, and choose not to allow my GPA to reflect me fully. Don't say that. Let those things speak in your personal statement, your resume. When you say it conclusively, it takes all the power out because you're like, it just, you shouldn't say these things. Don't say, I would hope that you're going to consider other circumstances. Everyone thinks that they are deserving of a spot. And as admissions officers, they get very callous to everyone thinking they're deserving. And honestly, it sounds a little entitled when you say, like, I would hope that you're going to consider me because of this, like, positivity, which is nice. But, like, they hear this from everyone. And, well, they don't hear it from everyone. So when they do hear it, it's kind of, they get annoyed. They're like, let the facts speak for themselves. So I would definitely cut that and submit the others. So overall, these are not the worst addendums. Like, they can get way worse. But these are not good. Like, they definitely have some issues in them that I would still clean up. And overall, I just would submit the GPA one. Like, that one's fine. You kept it very matter of fact. Like, here's why my GPA is lower. This is what was going on. I would be careful with the LSAT one. I don't think it adds anything. I think it just takes away from you. And as such, I don't see the point in submitting it. So yeah, that's all I've got for today. I will see you all next week. If you have anything, shoot it in. And yeah, hope you all have a lovely start to March. If you enjoyed what we talked about today or learned something new, please leave a review or a rating. It really does help us out and helps us reach more people. If you have a question or anything you want talked about in the world of LSAT or law school admissions, you can always email support@HeyFutureLawyer.com to get it in the podcast agenda. Just put podcast in the subject and we will talk about it on the show. Alrighty, that's all we have for today. So I will see you all next time.